Okay, so welcome to this very special episode of the Mission Makers podcast, brought to you live from Amsterdam Dance Event. On this show, we explore the misconceptions and mindsets surrounding success in the music industry. And today, I'm really honored to be joined by two guests. My mentor, Atish, who's made major waves as a headliner around the world for several years and a label owner at Manjumasi. And as well as his fellow mentee, Sakib, who's also a rising artist from New York. You've released on several highly acclaimed labels, from Sol Selectas to Abracadabra. You also started your own label, so welcome, guys. And is there anything maybe you want to introduce yourselves as well to the room today? And we can start with you, Atish.
Thanks for having me. No, not a lot to add. I'm a DJ, I'm a producer based in New York, and I love being a mentor to great mentees.
Nice, thank you.
And thanks for having me. I'm Sakib, and excited to have this conversation. I think I'm kind of in the process of figuring out the tipping point that we're about to talk about. So, yeah.
Thanks
for having me. Yeah.
It's always a pleasure. My name's Farah Nanji, and I'm your host of the Mission Makers podcast. And in the music industry, I'm a DJ, producer, journalist, podcaster, lecturer at Point Blank London, and curator at IMS in Ibiza. And I think we all know in this room there's probably no such thing as an overnight success. And however you define success, that path is never linear. It's filled with many twists, many turns, many roadblocks, and they're navigated at many different speeds. And when you're ebbing and flowing through those speeds, there are, of course, many defining moments that appear on that journey and can start to tip an artist to start breaking through. And so today we'll be diving much deeper into all of those various facets. So let's lay the landscape a little bit. How do you both actually define a tipping point? Because there can obviously be many different aspects. So yeah, Atish, we'll kick off with you.
I think, as you said, there's a lot of different ways you can define it. I think maybe the simplest definition I can think of that maybe applied to me is before you reach the tipping point, a lot of the artist process is hustling, trying to, get gigs, trying to get offers. You're saying yes to as many things that you can. And after the tipping point, you're still hustling, but I feel post-tipping point, you're saying no to more things than you're saying yes. And it's kind of learning, well, we'll get into what it's learning, but yeah, saying no to more things than you're saying yes is kind of when I think you've reached the tipping point.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's nice to have a no to-do list. Sakib?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think one other aspect of it for me, at least as a producer as well, that's like most of my output is, seeing other artists playing your music and seeing it being played out very like by bigger artists and like, regularly out there. That's part of it for me as well.
It's definitely, it means so much when you start seeing the artists that you've loved for so many years to start actually playing and recognizing your talent and your hard work, obviously, that's got to that point. Atish, can you pinpoint the actual moment that maybe you realized you had already reached that tipping point, and what factors sort of led to that realization?
Yeah, I think for me, I look at a singular moment in my career when that happened. It was in 2012. I played Robot Heart at Burning Man, and that recording came out. And after that recording came out, a lot of doors kind of opened. International requests came in, and I was saying no to a lot more things than I was saying yes. But as it was touched on, it was, on one hand, it kind of felt like an overnight thing, but it was also all the work that had kind of gone in up to getting to that point. I had been releasing a lot of mixes, podcasts, kind of doing the hustle and all that, but that all came to fruition, and the tipping point was possible because of what happened before it. And also, I think there was a lot of luck that was involved in my tipping point. In 2012, social media was just getting popular. SoundCloud was just picking up steam, and because of social media becoming popular and SoundCloud picking up steam, having a Robot Heart Burning Man set released on there when the world is learning about Robot Heart and the world is getting on SoundCloud, it was just kind of a right place, right time to have a set come out that just kind of blew the doors open at that time.
The perfect storm.
It was really a perfect storm, yeah.
What would you tell yourself looking back,
What would I tell myself looking back? Well, there were a couple of mistakes I made along the way. I think now that I have 11 years more experience than I did at that time, I think I would take much less for granted now than I did before. I think I was maybe a little cockier and a little more arrogant as a young buck, kind of saying like, "Oh, I'm amazing," and then kind of reality sets in, and you realize, as I said before, the hustle never ends, and you can't just kind of coast. So I would say, yeah.
At least you could admit that.
Yeah.
Sakib, you're currently breaking through the industry at the moment, and the stakes have now, been raised. What have been some of the most important steps that you've taken to achieve this? And do you feel that the pressure points have now increased or changed in any way?
So I think that some of the most important things for me were, one of them was realizing and presenting myself as a more professional artist, which partly was working with, like, starting to work with listed bookings and have an agency, like an agent behind me who's representing me. I think that generally now that so like I have an agent working with me and I work with a manager, I think the pressure points have actually gotten a little bit easier, and it's been a little bit easier to be an artist now because there's other people doing those things that I don't have to think about all the time. So it's actually gotten a little bit easier.
That's nice. Enjoy it while it lasts. And how have you both sort of navigated some of the stresses and expectations maybe that come with with career growth? And have you ever experienced maybe like a change in people's behavior who, before you were at the level you are now, they didn't really bat an eyelid, but now they suddenly sort of treat you kind of different? Like, have you experienced that, Atish?
Yeah. So I think there's like kind of two things to explore there. One is, I think pre-tipping point, when music was for me more of a hobby, it was a lot about community and friends and this everyone's kind of your friend and this kind of thing, and maybe some promoters or bookers didn't give me the time of day. And then after the tipping point, I think it kind of came to a feeling that this is more of a business than it is just like homies hanging out, and that was kind of a mindset shift. And I think I don't want this to sound as bad as it does, but you kind of realize once you make a career out of this, there's definitely still many personal, close, emotional relationships that you have, with friends, but you also realize that some of it is very transactional, and maybe people didn't give you the time of day before, and now they give you the time of day now, and you can be hurt by it, or you can just realize like, oh, now you have something to offer this other entity who needs something from you, and it's not a judgment of your character or person, it's just the dynamics have changed now that you're a marketable asset, basically. And then just quick touching on the first part of the question, and Sakib touched on this a bit. One thing that kind of changes after the tipping point is looking at yourself as the CEO of a startup. It's no longer necessarily purely an artist project. Artistry and your creativity and your expression is still part of it, but there's a big mindset shift that comes with it too, which is, I have to manage and run a team and think about finances, marketing, all this kind of thing. So,
and you're that visionary, and the team are there to really amplify your vision and bring that to life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. And I know that, before you went full time into the music industry, you were at a very successful job at Facebook. Also in that perfect storm of when, Facebook was kind of first sort of becoming successful. And I remember reading your newsletters back then, and you openly shared some of the worries that you had. So when you took that leap, what was it like sort of cultivating that financial freedom after Facebook and leaving that full-time job?
So, for me, having a job that was lucrative and well-paying, I was in a privileged position where I made enough money to be able to save money. And I think, what I see with my mentees and a lot of the artist journey, the biggest stress, I think, in having an artist career, full time is the financial pressures and the financial stresses. Even if you have money, it's still extremely stressful. But I think for me, making that transition was a little bit easier because I was very analytical about my finances, and I made sure not to make the career jump until I had, minimum 1 to 2 years of savings, such that when that tipping point came and I decided I could do full time, I could truly focus on an uncompromising approach to my art, rather than thinking, okay, maybe I should change my sound, or maybe I should take these gigs that aren't fulfilling, or these short-term wins, rather than thinking about the long-term project. So again, I was in a privileged position where I had enough savings to do that, but because I was in that position, my transition was somewhat smooth because I was able to focus purely on the art for 1 to 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great to be able to have that 1 or 2 years worth of savings. Sakib, you currently work in the health industry part-time. And so what advice would you give to other artists that also manage multiple industries and they have to strike that balance of taking risks versus making maybe more calculated decisions?
So yeah, I'm still in the process of making this transition where I work part-time as a physician for 7 days a month. I think it's really important to have like a long-term vision of the next couple, like the next decades of your life and where you want to be. And I think it's really important before you make this transition to really plan it out and have, it's really important to have the long-term vision, I think, and see yourself in the future and where you want to be and what you want to do with it. So I think that's the main advice I would give. Yeah.
And I think that's a great point you're making, Sakib. And to extend that, there's many different dimensions which you can explore. Like, where do you want to be in 10 years? One is financially, obviously, how much money do you want to make? But also, it's such a vague thing I'm going to say, but it's really important. Like, why do you want to be an artist? Like, what are you trying to express? Do you want to be famous? Do you want to make music that's really interesting to a niche audience? Do you want to have do you want to make a lot of money? Do you want to triangulate and do all three? And understand that this answer that you give yourself can evolve and can change. That answer has changed myself over the years, especially as I've gotten married and had a kid. But I think it's always good to kind of have some kind of North Star kind of guiding light, especially when you get to that tipping point when you're making the transition to full time, which is, what do I want out of this whole thing? Because it's really easy to get distracted and to kind of get lost. And then just the last extension of that, the shortcut one-liner is, how much am I willing to compromise myself, and what things am I willing to compromise on?
Really well said.
And also there's no shortcuts in music. It's like a lifelong thing, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. So
absolutely. And the industry, as we obviously have experienced, changes. It is prone to many risks. Obviously COVID wiped the whole industry out. And so having, some of that understanding of like, A, you are almost running a business, and B, there's a financial stability that you need to achieve with that so that you can weather the storm is obviously super, super important. And so then how pivotal do you believe timing sort of plays into that tipping point in the industry? And how can artists recognize, capitalize, and create those moments to really propel their careers forward?
So it's kind of timing is really, really important. But the hard part, or the other side of the coin, is that I think it's really hard to force the right timing. So for me, I got lucky with my timing, plus the hard work that went before it. I don't have the answer or it's not possible and say how to nail the timing. But there are some things that I've observed over the years, with my own career or with others, where you can, where you see a pattern evolving. So let's start with my thing. Instagram was becoming popular, SoundCloud was becoming popular, Burning Man was becoming popular. When things are just kind of on the cusp of their own tipping points, technologically or culturally, having something that taps into that culture is really helpful. Another example is, the pandemic. There were a lot of DJs who I've never heard before who maybe just started DJing, and then they just started live streaming during the pandemic. And now post-pandemic, they're playing these massive gigs. So I think maybe it can be forced. I don't know how to force that or construct it, but I think the best advice I can give is just be aware of what things are changing in the world and do what you're doing authentically, but try and see if you can kind of massage that a little bit to fit within something that's, within its delta, within its state of flux and change right now. And I think that can be a catalyst towards getting towards a tipping point or nailing the timing. But I think it's hard overall to get it perfectly or to get it right.
Yeah, I don't think no one could ever get it perfectly, but I think you kind of know you kind of feel it when it's happening in a way. And you obviously had a lot of success with that live stream during the pandemic.
Yeah. I think timing is really important, but you can't predict it. And it's really useless if you haven't done the work to back it up.
Yeah.
So I feel like opportunities will present themselves to you, and if you're not ready or you're not presenting something, like as we were talking about, 10 years ago, I met Jamie Jones in BPM, and I was talked it all up, gave him my USB. He's like, bro, I'm so excited to hear your music. This is going to be awesome. But the music wasn't really that good. So it didn't really mean anything, So I think timing presents itself. But if you're not ready, then it doesn't really mean much. But I'm an example of that also, that I started streaming on Blondish's channel during the pandemic, and it really was a huge part of like building my following and getting people to hear me. So it worked out for me, but I think that you have to have done the work, otherwise it doesn't mean much.
Yeah. And I think you also need to know when you actually have to pivot and like be quite analytical and evaluate. If something's not working, then you need to change. Otherwise you're going to get, you're going to stall in a way. But yeah, Atish, you've had a really incredible career so far. And I'm sure, as we've touched upon, it really is also down to those tribes. And I'm sure I can speak for both Sakib and I that we're both really grateful to be part of your mentorship program. It was so exciting when you shared that you were opening up, I think it was like 10 spots on your program, and you selected us. But yeah, before we dive a bit deeper into that sort of journey that you took as a mentor, did you have any interesting mentors that shaped your journey along the way? And
I had a few mentors at different phases through my career. I think my first mentor was probably Lee Burridge. He's the one. I was a mega Lee Burridge disciple, before I was even a DJ. And then, we had a friendship that slowly emerged. And then I started DJing, and then he kind of took me under his wing. And then I think the next phase of my career, Beiruz kind of became my mentor, and he's in another chapter, of his life now. And then I think my mentor right now is Phil Young from Mandy. And that kind of mentorship relationship I have with him isn't so much about the music itself, but it's a lot about, I'm 40 years old now. It's about, this managing the health and the mental health and the lifestyle, and people in their 40s tend to want different things in life, compared to people in their 20s and 30s. So Philip, of Mandy, he's kind of the current mentor in this chapter of my career.
Nice. Well, if you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, that's not a bad benchmark. What were some of the things, going back a little bit to when you were sort of on that cusp? What were some of the key things they told you as you were approaching that tipping point? If you want to hear the rest of our conversation, then head over to Spotify, Apple, or wherever else you get your podcasts. It's a great question. So you asked how do you sort of balance maybe not wanting to make music full time, but you want to have those opportunities with those important gigs.
Well, one, I think you're actually in a great position. I think there's a conception that one has to be fully focused on their art, 100% to be able to make waves. But one of the advantages you have is since you're not dependent on music for income, you actually have this artistic luxury to fully commit yourself to what you want to express without compromising. So the first thing I would say is a very soft answer, but really, really lean into taking that time. You don't have that rush towards narrowing down your precise sound or your precise vision towards, expressing what you want to express that's uniquely you. And then more tactically, I guess there's a follow-on question, but in the interest of time, I still do think it's valuable to try and participate in the scene. Go out, meet people. I mean, coming to ADE is a great thing, kind of building those connections at these big milestone moments when a lot of industry people are there, which is more important if you're not doing it full time. Because if you are doing it full time, you're meeting a lot of these people anyway when you're touring every weekend and doing this kind of thing. So my short answer is take this as a luxurious opportunity to really, really narrow down on your sound. And even though it's not your full-time gig, make sure you create space and time for those networking opportunities and getting in people's faces.
Oftentimes
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some truth to that. And just to kind of repeat a little bit, saying there, some opportunities might be held back because it's not your full-time thing. My response to that is it's kind of controlling your brand. You can kind of control in a way the way that you want people to perceive you, and you don't have to lie. You can still be authentic, but if you think that you having a full-time career is holding you back, you don't necessarily have to reveal that to everyone. I mean, it's the way that you present yourself, your music. I'm just making up an example, but if you're posting something, on Instagram every 2 days of you creating these bangers in the studio, like, okay, that's fine. You don't need to post a video or photo of you sitting at a office, doing tax returns for someone or whatever. Ultimately, you can kind of control the vision of how you want to be perceived to an extent, which is brand in a word.
And I think you can, like, with hard enough work, you can get like very big labels to hear your music. Like, it's not easy, but you can do it. And especially like being at ADE, like you'll meet people like who are in big, huge labels who are doing A&R. So I think it is very possible to get heard and get on those, it's how you position yourself.
Yeah, and just want to add to that because, I always looked up to Richard Branson as somebody who's in so many industries, and he did many of them super well. And I don't think that, when Richard Branson knocks on your door, you're going to say no to those opportunities. And I think the networking aspect is really key because if you have those people that are in your tribe, those 5-10 people that really are in your corner and believe in you, they're the ones who also help you pitch to those bigger labels and speak for you when you're not in that room. And there are many artists as well, like who are also passionate about different things. And once they reach a certain level, they go and also pursue that simultaneously. There's so many examples here, but one that comes to mind is Seth when he opened up his restaurant, which is a completely different industry. Even Blondish, she's in crypto, that takes up a lot of time. So I don't think you should be fearful of that. I think that can actually be your superpower if you make it to your superpower.
Yeah.
Any other, yes?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a little bit of both. The way I kind of look at it is that, production, it takes years to like make your sound and to realize your style. I feel like I always felt like you have to make the first like 500 or 700 songs and just before you actually start like making your own style, So for me, at least, like I put production first. Because I was also in medical school. Like I didn't start releasing music till I was in medical school, like electronic music. And by the time I finished medical school, I think I'd put out like 40 tracks or something like that. So I definitely put the production part of it first, because I kind of believed in this concept that the music will speak for itself. At some point, it becomes like an undeniable force that even though I'm not friends with like the guy who runs this club, and I'm not like a cool guy who grew up with all these other cool New York people, and I'm just like just as like I didn't have a lot of those connections.
I think you're cool, Sakib.
Thank you. But like I didn't have a lot of those connections. I didn't grow up in New York. I came from Pakistan. I didn't know anybody. I was in medical school working like 80 hours a week. For me, I put the music part of it first, and I let it speak for itself. So I do think that everybody has a very different like story and a different trajectory and a different way that things happen. But I think if you really care, if like your MO is that you're a music producer, so for me, from the start, it was always that I'm a music producer, and I am a DJ. Like I've been a DJ and a record collector for a long time, but really the way that I'm gonna get out of New York and the way I'm gonna be known is through my music. So I put more of my energy into that because my music is cooler than me in a way. Like if that makes sense, like my music will reach more people than I could ever reach, and so I think it's different for everybody, and it might be different for you. But I also think like timing is important and connections are important. But I put more of my energy into production over many, many years though. It's like in 2013 was my first release when I was in medical school. And since then, like I didn't even really start to reach the tipping point till like 2019 or 2020. Yeah. So I hope that kind of answered your question. I'm also like a crazy person in that like I would be in medical school and work like a 12-hour shift and then come home and sit in my studio and then just make music and then go to bed and just rinse and repeat for years,
Nice.
So yeah.
Nice. One last question before we wrap it up. So to repeat the question, how do you promote your music in a place where maybe the niche of what you're producing isn't, as popular?
So find the biggest artists and the biggest labels that are doing it. Like, for example, an Afro house like Mo Black or Black Coffee, right? So even if you're like, we have a friend who lives in Georgia, but he's like a crazy Afro house producer, and that's how he did it, Yeah.
I agree with your answer. And then one thing which I can just throw out there, which is advice I give to my mentees a lot in general, which is create your own scene.
Yeah.
Like break the constraints from what you think you're operating in.
Go for it.
That's a heavy question. But I guess an EP is just like a bunch of tracks that go together. That you don't have to necessarily have imagined them together.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, and just to repeat the question, it's how do you think about EPs?
sorry.
No, sorry.
Bottom up or top down?
Yeah.
I think it's a hard question. It's so artist specific. And are you writing music for a label or are you just freeform expressing? Everyone, you just have to find your own path in how to build an EP. And a label might guide you there too, saying, hey, we like this song. We want another one like this.
Yeah.
Just
It's
to
very
add to that,
personal.
like yesterday I was with a label that I release quite frequently on, and they really like this one track, and they said, send us something else to pair this with, and I thought, it has to be in that genre, that sort of the same ethnic kind of soundscapes I was painting from, and then I was gutted when he was like, oh, don't know about these two, because I do really like those tracks. And then when I saw him yesterday, because then I sent him other tracks that were completely not related to that genre, and he was like, this is what I wanted to pair this with something completely different. And sometimes you just can't predict what somebody else is in the label particularly is going to say to you, as much as you try to dissect and overanalyze it and even write that way when you're in the studio. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been the Mission Makers podcast with Sakib and Atish.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Great time.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we've enjoyed having these conversations. If you want to grab a copy of today's show notes, then head over to missionmakers.com, where you'll also find notes from all of our previous episodes. And if you're interested in talking to me about producing podcasts or coming down to my music and motorsports events, then you can reach out to me at Mission Makers or at dj.n1nja on Instagram. The music played in today's episode is an exclusive preview of my upcoming track, Infinite Being, with Deepak Chopra, and it will be coming out early next year. This has been a Mission Makers production. Thank you as ever for listening, and until next time, keep it laser focused.
We're not talking about mind, which is a modified expression of what we call the self. Self is fundamental reality, fundamental being. We call ourselves human beings, not human thinkings, or not human doings, but human beings. So right now, as you're listening to me, if you would just try this, as you're listening to me, be aware of that which is listening.